All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, we are talking the intersection of dating for entrepreneurial women. I have a lot of friends that have been, hey, Michael, are your guy friends dating or what's going on? And I feel like there's just something going on. Like there's an epidemic happening where there's a lot of great women in my life that just cannot find a good man. I'm like, what is going on? So I started scouring the internet looking for someone who could give me answers, and I found someone, Miss Wesleyene Whitaker. She's a sales coach and strategist, entrepreneur, and she's also in the dating world. She's dating and she's got answers for what's going on in the dating world for entrepreneurial women. So we're going to talk about that. So get your pen and paper out if you are ready you're single and ready to mingle and you need some notes on how to find your man or your woman. We're going to answer those questions for you today on the Blueprint Podcast. Let's get started. All right. Well, super excited to have you on today. I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. And so before we get started, why don't you just introduce yourself to the people, let them know a little bit about who you are and what you're bringing to the call today or to the episode today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah. I always like to introduce myself as a recovering chemist.
Okay.
So I went to school. I got a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, went into that world. And after a couple of years, I was like, I want more human interaction. Okay. So I stepped into sales. I finally figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And from there, I started my own sales consulting business, which I do today. Yeah. I am in my 30s. Yes, late 30s. And I am mom of two amazing boys.
Yeah, I love that. And, I want to get into what you do professionally because we actually asked you some questions before we even started the call. I was like, hey, I got some sales problems. Like, hey, what? So I definitely want to get into that because I think you have some really good knowledge. I think most of my audience are entrepreneurs, right? And so I think you have some value to add on that front. But I want to get into the dating conversation first, right? So why don't you kind of explain to me like what you think is going on? Like, are we just out of good men for people who are looking for heterosexual relationships? Are we just out of good men and they're just like, or are there something that women are doing wrong? And what I don't want to do is I don't want to victim blame. I don't want women to be like, okay, this is why you don't have a man. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I want to genuinely figure out what is going on. So as you've been, in the dating world and kind of just trying to find a partner, what are you seeing out there?
So I really think that one of the biggest challenges is expectations are not aligned. So what women are expecting or what women want is very different than what men are expecting and what men want. And a lot of times if you're in your late 30s, early 40s, late 20s, as a woman, you may be ready to settle down. You're like, I've done the career thing. I may have had a long-term relationship or a marriage, and now I'm ready for my forever. I'm ready for my Boaz, right? Yeah. Whereas a man is like, I was locked down for 5 years. I just got out of a relationship. I've been dad and husband and doing all these things. And I just want to be free. Right. And so our expectations are misaligned. And so I really think that one of the main things that we have to do as women and as men is have those conversations earlier rather than later. Because you will find someone, you will date them for a few weeks, few months, few years. And then you're like, are we moving somewhere? And they're like, no, we're just having fun. We're just, hanging out, right? Yeah. And so having those conversations earlier are really, I think, the key for both people to feel like they're whole. Okay, gotcha. And do you think there is because you kind of, some of your examples you described are someone who maybe has had a previous relationship already, maybe, weren't in a partnership, got divorced or a long-term relationship, but didn't work out. I know you kind of described that context. Do you think that context still applies to maybe someone who is, maybe mid to late 30s and just hasn't necessarily even had that at all, right? Yeah. So somebody who's in their mid to late 30s and they've never had a long-term relationship typically signals to me that they've been focused on their career or they've been focused on their education. So they could have been in medical school, professional school, whatever school. Yeah. And now they're like, I'm ready. Right. Yeah. Or they could have been climbing the corporate ladder. I have a very good friend that became the president and CEO of a $80 million company when she was like 36. Right. Yeah. And so her focus was work.
Okay.
Right. And so that would be what I would say would be the challenge with a lot of women who haven't had those long-term relationships.
So in 2024, do you think it's like, hey, if you anticipate that is something you're going to want, like you really have to prioritize that early in your life? Or it's like, hey, like once you get to mid-30s, like, yo, that ship has sailed. Like, like, you know what I mean? Your chances are like, you know what I mean? And because I mean, I've had friends who were like, hey, they're going to freeze their eggs and, you know, and because they want to be moms, but they're like, hey, I don't anticipate being able to find a life partner. And so like, you know what I mean? So like, do you think that's the actual reality, or maybe that's just kind of like a mindset shift that needs to happen?
So I really think that no matter where you are in life, no matter what your past experience has been, it's really important to balance, right? So if you have been that career focused person and now you're like, I just want to date. I want to do all of these things. And so I am solely focused on dating. I am solely focused on finding my life partner. Or if you're on the other end of the spectrum where you've gotten out of a long-term relationship and you're like, I'm not ready to do anything serious. I'm just casually doing this thing.
Right.
So it's, what is your goal right now in life? What is your purpose? What is the thing that you have been called to do to fulfill, right? Like you have to do this self-work first before you can partner with another person, because a lot of times we're like, well, that person's going to make me whole. No. If you're a half, if you're broken, the person that you partner with isn't going to make you whole because they might be broken too.
Yeah.
So you have to focus on you.
Wow, that's so good. Let's dive into your story a little bit, because you gave some really good examples when we talked before this episode in terms of how you've navigated this. So let's talk about kind of just some experiences you had. How did you, I guess, kind of go into kind of just briefly into your history? I know you went through a divorce and kind of had some healing you had to do, and then go into some of the things that you did to like prepare yourself to get back into the dating world and kind of really just doing some of the things you just described.
So I was married for 15 years, and then I got divorced. And what I realized was I lost myself in my marriage. So I really didn't know who Wesleyene was. And so a part of that was I was like, no dating. I'm not interested in any relationship. And I made myself deal with my pain. So when my kids would go with their dad and I would have lots of time alone, my first inclination was, oh, let me go visit this friend or this brother, go here, go there. But I didn't. I sat here, I did therapy, I had support groups, I spent a lot of time with God. Like even to this day, I start every single day spending at least 30 to 60 minutes in my Bible. I journal, I pray, I listen to God, and I had to figure out what parts of me I needed to heal, right? And so when I talk about like doing this hard work of healing, it's because sometimes we have childhood trauma. Sometimes we have trauma from previous relationships or previous jobs. And we carry that baggage with us into each new relationship and we don't heal from it. And so we're just piling the stuff on top of it over.
And does that lead to some of those misplaced expectations, maybe seeing the world a certain way because you're not necessarily healed? And so maybe you, not saying you miss good people, but maybe you don't see things as clearly as maybe as you could because of some of that trauma or misplaced expectation?
Absolutely. I mean, when I first got through my first batch of healing and I was like, okay, I'm ready to dip my toe into dating again. There were things that, there's work you can do alone, but then there's work that you have to do while you're dating. And so things would happen and I'm like, okay, what is happening here? Right. And before it would trigger me and maybe I would just shut down or maybe I would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. But now I stop and I ask myself, what is this triggering inside me and where is it coming from? And I take time to process it and I journal about it, or I talk to my therapist about it, or I pray about it. But I have to work through those things because you don't want to spill all over somebody. Right. And one of the things that I remember my therapist saying when I said, well, how do I know when I'm ready to date? And she was like, when you're not bleeding all over somebody. I was like, what does that mean? Bleeding all over someone. She was like, well, when they say something or when they do something and it doesn't trigger you to have this reaction, right? Like this big emotional outburst, or you just withdraw. And so I was like, okay, I'm not gushing blood, but I'm still dripping a little bit. Right?
Yeah. So I hear you, like self-awareness, investing in yourself, really your mental health, healing from trauma is kind of the number one thing. I think that's something that I think people know. I think there's that messaging is out there, but the reality of what it takes to do it, right? So you have to be prepared to, really invest in yourself and understand like what is self-awareness. I think I saw a study the other day and it was like 5%, like at the end of the study, basically they were saying that like only 5% of people actually are self-aware as they think they are. Right. So a lot of times we think that we know about ourselves, what we want and what we don't want, but then you start unpacking things and you realize like, oh, okay, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know what are my triggers. And so I think definitely spending some time there. You mentioned being able to change your environment a little bit. So talk about some of the things that you were doing to, maybe get out of I don't know, like I want to say the loop, you know what I mean? In terms of like you just hear the same thing from the same people and they just kind of reinforce your worldview. So being able to like get outside of maybe things and try new things that maybe are outside of your comfort zone. So talk about how you did that.
Yeah. So I do desire one day to be married again, right? And so I decided that if I wanted to have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship, I needed to understand what healthy looked like. So I surround myself. My closest friends are very happily married. They share their struggles with me. They share the things that are going really well. I learn from them. And I attend marriage conferences, and a lot of times,
really, as a single
woman in there. Yes, I attended a marriage conference, and I was the only single person in there. And it was a conference actually at our church, and so they had like a breakout session where we had dinner. And I was sitting at this table, and they were like, "Oh, we have another chair." I was like, "Oh, I'm by myself," and they were like, "You are?" I said, yeah. I was like, I'm not married right now, but I do desire to become married. And what I didn't do before I got married last time was understand what good looks like. We go to school to learn how to become business owners, to become doctors, to do all the things, but we just jump into relationships, right?
Wow.
Like, and so I've read books on marriage. It's like I ask questions. I am curious because again, when I'm stepping into a dating relationship, I want to know what's healthy and what's unhealthy. I don't want to use my preconceived notions to cover things up.
Wow, that is fascinating. I mean, that feels really uncomfortable to me, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, even like you said, surrounding yourself with people who are married. I mean, you being, the third wheel, I'm sure at times with your married friends and like the uncomfortableness of that. But I think at the same time, like if that is something that you desire, you have to be able to work at it, right? And it's more than just like putting yourself out there in terms of dating, you know what I mean? Getting on the apps or going to certain places, trying to meet people. It's like, okay, well, how can you surround yourself with people who are going to help you become better? That I think is probably the biggest thing that I would encourage people to do, men or women, right? Because I think that's just, you are some of the people you surround yourself with, right? And so if you surround yourself with other single people or broken people who have broken relationships, although they may be great personal friends, they may not necessarily push you to where you need to be. And I think there's balance, right? You need to also probably have single friends that you can talk about, girl, what happened on this day? You know what I mean? You got to be able to have some of those things that maybe your married friends just can't relate to, you know what I mean? And so I definitely think there's a balance there, but I love that. That's such a great example. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. What do you think is something that women actually want, like that you think is healthy? You talked about some of the expectations and like, so what is it that women in 2024, entrepreneurial, career women, like what is it that they actually want and to help them like, actually find somebody who's compatible with that?
Communication is very important. Okay. Non-sexual intimacy is another one. Something else that's really important is you want to find someone who you can have intellectual conversations with. And so if you're a successful woman, you want to be able to, the person doesn't need to also be a doctor or a lawyer or a business owner, right? But you want to be able to unload about your day and they can ask you questions to shift your perspective. Like nobody wants to be fixed, but we want to be able to have these deep conversations with the person that we're dating. And then non-sexual intimacy, a lot of guys are like, what does that even mean? Like what? Intimacy means sex to me. Like, what does that mean? And for each woman, it's a little bit different. For some people, I just want you to hold my hand when we're crossing the street. For some people, it's like, give me a hug, right? Sometimes it's, can you rub my back? And for some people, intimacy is that deep conversation. It's feeling safe. It's feeling connected. It's, you feel like, okay, this is a person that I feel comfortable just hanging around the house with.
Okay, that's so good. And I think that reminds me, a lot of times on this podcast, we're talking about faith, right? How we intersect our faith into our business, into our community. And I think this is even a case for getting involved in a church, getting involved in community for that point we just made earlier in terms of like how to find, people that maybe are going to challenge you outside of your comfort zone. I know sometimes churches can be toxic in terms of everyone believes the same thing in these think tanks. But I think if you can find a church that has different thought people were diverse and you can really learn things. I think that's a case there. But then also men who maybe have some of the values that would allow for that. You know what I mean? You think about church culture, we do a lot of processing, we do a lot of talking and listening and, Bible studies. And those are skill sets that you can develop within, so, if you're not a Christian watching this, I definitely think that, dating a Christian man, you need to be equally yoked, right? Yeah. But if you are a Christian, I think, and you haven't necessarily invested in your church community or some kind of faith-based community, I think that's super important to be able to find the people who may have those same values that you just described. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. Mm-hmm. And, a term that we use in the Christian faith often is equally yoked, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about being, equally yoked, if you actually look at the Bible, the biblical context, a yoke is something that brings oxen together, right? Mm-hmm. And so what a yoke is, it's one person might be moving a little bit further and the other person is kind of helping them along. Mm-hmm. And so being equally yoked, some women have this list of all the things like, I need you involved in the church. I need you this, I need you that. And, I think that it's important for you to know like what you need. Mm-hmm. And for me, again, I spend at least 30 minutes a day talking to God, reading my Bible. Mm-hmm. I don't expect the person I'm dating to have that same level, right? Mm-hmm. I do want them to have their own personal relationship with God, right? And I do want them to seek God in the way that they need to seek God at that time in their life. Okay. And I think that there are certain values that we should have that are aligned, right? And so one of those is that, right? Are we both Christians? Do we both believe in the same thing? Yeah. Can we go to church together? Can we read the Bible together? Yeah. Like, can we have these conversations about religion, about the Bible, and nobody gets offended or upset? Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that person has to go to church every single Sunday. Mm-hmm. They have to be at every single men's group. They have to be volunteer. Like all of that, those are external things that a lot of times people are looking for. But I like to say by their fruits, you will know them. Okay. So what are the fruit that person is putting out into the world? How do they act when you're out on a date? Mm-hmm. And are they very kind to the waiters and the waitresses? Yeah. Are they talking about everybody who walks in? Like pay attention to their fruit.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And so do you think it's one of those things where when you're doing the work, you're doing some of the things we're talking about, do you have to just wait for it to come to you? Like, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people, they're like testimony, like, I stumbled into a relationship, right? I wasn't really looking for it. I just found them, right? Is that something that you should, at this stage, like, I mean, if you are, mid to late 30s, are you just like praying and asking God to bring it? Or do you really need to be, I guess, more proactive in prioritizing your dating relationships?
I don't think that you can just go to work, go home and go to church and expect to find your mate, right? Yeah. I do think that you have to push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Okay. And so that part where we talked about tapping into who you are and your purpose, if your purpose is to help underprivileged youth. And so 2 Saturdays a month, you go volunteer in an area for underprivileged youth. Mm-hmm. You might find a guy who's also doing that. And you guys are striking up a conversation because you have a combined purpose, right? Okay. But I do think that it is important to pray. Like you have to pray and you have to ask God to open your eyes. Like I often say, give me the eyes to see, the ears to hear. Close the doors that need to be closed. Open the doors that need to be open. Lord, you know the desires of my heart. Bring me this person. Like I believe that we have to do those things, but I also believe as we're in that waiting phase, as we're in that anticipation phase, we don't just become a hermit. Okay. We do the things that bring us joy. We go on that work trip. We do that extra event. So like I told you about the married conference I went to. My church also has like a singles weekend for people that are over the age of 35. Okay. So of course I'm going to go and check that out, right? Like why not? Right. Because that's my age demographic. Yeah. I'm not with 22-year-olds, right? I'm with people that are a part of my age demographic. So you have to try things in order to put yourself in a place that you can be ready to receive what God is sending.
Okay. That's so good. So even within the church, we have a lot of toxic men. And transparently, I was a toxic church man early. I kind of had some things going on that, there was some purity culture. There was some shame-based things that just made me, and thankfully God was able to work on my heart. And my wife had patience and helped me get through some things when we were dating, right? Yeah. But I think about, there are still a lot of men who are struggling. And I will say my gender by and large, we are not doing well in terms of how we are, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of pain that are being caused by men. So I understand a lot of women's frustration when they're like, hey, listen, like, they're just a lot of guys that are toxic, or even Christian men that just haven't grown up. And like, this is all these things, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, as I was doing even research for this episode, I mean, it got overwhelming to me, because I was just doing some Googles and YouTube and just hearing the pain that was coming out of every conversation. And I was just like broken. I was like, oh my God, there's so many people who are hurting, men and women, right? And so I want to recognize that in this episode for women who are listening to this. Like, hey, I understand that there is pain, and I want to speak to that, and I want to empower that and say, hey, like, you guys, I want to affirm how women feel about men because there are a lot of things that we are not doing well. And I want to even use this channel as a platform to challenge men to be better, and want to think through some conversations and how we can do that. But I also want to hold us accountable, right? So how can women hold men accountable, but also empower them? Right, because we do have a lot of men who are struggling for reasons, like, you know what I mean. They're not just waking up deciding they want to be assholes, right? There's like there are things happening in our world that are hurting both sides, right? So we need to hold the line and say, hey, listen, no, you guys got to be better. Like, we got to be better. But then also, how can we empower? So does that make sense?
Yeah. So, you know, I think that, so we kind of talked about what women need, and I talked about communication. Men like communication too. And so if we only tell a man when they have messed up, or when they did something wrong, then they're not receiving anything that we're saying, right? So balancing the positive words, balancing the, wow, that was a great thing that you did. I really appreciate you calling me in the middle of the day, checking on me. Thank you for ordering me lunch. Like, reinforcing the positive. And then when something does happen, like, we are all sinners. And the thing is, we cannot be so high and mighty as women to think that we are perfect and we are up on a pedestal. A lot of times we're good at keeping things in. So the world may not see the things that we are holding on to, the things that we have done, but with men, they're a lot more out in the open. So we have to have grace, right? We do need to call people on their stuff. And I have had a lot of male friends. I am pretty direct. And so when I'm like, I noticed that this happened and this is a pattern. Did you see that? And I'll be like, oh, well, I didn't look at it like that. So it's a pattern, and I can tell that it's impacting you. What steps can we work through so it doesn't happen again, right? Like, make it a partnership. If you are dating a person, you want to make sure that this is a partnership. It's not like, you fix this, you fix that. This is wrong with you. This is wrong with that. Kind of like you talked about your wife. Like, she was patient with you. And we're not going to have this perfect man that just comes ready-made and everything is great. If you find a person and they meet your baseline characteristics, right? Like, this person is a man of God. He knows that he is sinning, but he is repenting and he is trying, and he does this, and that, and he tumbles and falls. Don't kick him when he's down. Like, encourage him out of it. Don't enable bad behavior, right? Because there are men who are verbally, physically, mentally, emotionally abusive, and women stay in those spaces because they start to expect that. So there is a fine line between enabling bad behavior and encouraging a good man, a man who does well, who you're like, hey, you did this hurt me. How can we come up with a plan to work through this? And you see changed behavior versus the person who, you did this hurt me. They apologize and they keep doing the same bad behavior. So again, it takes discernment for us as women to understand which bucket they're in. But don't just give up at the first, what we call red flag. Right?
Well, that's a good point, because, you know, I've talked to so many of my friends who have healthy relationships. And I, especially and for my Christian friends, I am so surprised at how many people had tumultuous dating experiences. And I'm like, it's like we all struggle dating and getting through it. And the common theme was people who fought for each other. And that's like true of my own relationship. But like, we weren't perfect, and there was definitely things that I wish I would go back and I would change. But like, the difference was that like we both fought to be together, right? And there was some, like you said, there were some baseline things that we knew, okay, like I had some boxes checked, she had some boxes checked, and I was like, okay, we got some brokenness on both sides. Let's fight through and let's get it. And like, see how we can stay together. And you build that skill set by getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, which is exactly why I'm so proud of you for like going to a married conference single, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like those uncomfortable moments that you have to learn to just get through, be willing to really have the hard conversations, being able to understand that, hey, your partner isn't going to check every single box or not going to be, you know, you may not always have like the same political views, right? Like you don't got to dip because your person's not going to vote the same way. You know what I mean? So like those are things that like, you know, I think we have to learn as a society to do. And it's getting harder because everything's getting so black and white. The media is making everything like, hey, you either like me or you're against me, right? And I think if you take that attitude into your relationship, it's just going to cause a lot of problems because you're competing against your partner. And that's something that I even had to work through. I'm a competitive person. I want to win, right? And so I'm like, my wife has to remind me all the time, like, hey, I'm on your team. Like we're not against each other, right? And so if you can start to practice that in your, you know, in your normal relationships and your, you know, just your platonic relationships, so like not competing and like battling against people just for the sake of battling, right? Because obviously, like you said, you have to hold the line on certain things. And if you have a non-negotiable in terms of just your value system, you know, that's, you know, that is what it is. I'm not going to tell somebody to lower their standards, but just also be willing to know, hey, you're going to have to fight through some things and practice that because you're going to need it if you want a lifelong relationship. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something about tumultuous relationships, your friends that are Christian. And so we have to remember that the enemy does not like godly union. So whether it's a friendship, a relationship, whatever it is, so he's going to find ways and reasons to make you guys have arguments or disagreements or not see eye to eye because he knows once you are joined as one, it's a lot harder to break what God has put together. So if you're in a relationship, if you have started dating someone or you're a few months or a few years in and you feel like it's hard, always examine, is this hard? Why is this hard? Not just I want to give up or this is too much or I don't want to do it, but really examine the why is this hard?
Yeah, that's really good. That's a good question for your therapist to ask. Like you're processing something like, hey, why are we having challenges? What is the thing? That's really good. Okay, so you shared that men value communication. So being able to communicate with someone who maybe you're dating or building a relationship with, being able to be gracious, not kick them when they're down. What are some other things that you've learned about men over your lifetime that could help women understand men better so that they can maybe have healthier dating relationships?
Men like to be supported. So I have 2 boys and I can see how I encourage them and how I speak to them and how it just lights them up. So most men that have had a positive female influence in their life, they had their mom, their aunt, their grandmother supporting them, cheering them on. And so when they look for a life partner, that's what they want. They want somebody supporting them. Like, oh, I just did this thing at work and it's going to be televised and you're on the other end watching on YouTube like, yay, right? And then you send them encouraging notes. So that support is really, really important. And I'm not sure what the demographic is of your listeners, but what I will say that the world is hard for Black men. I also have 3 younger brothers, and the things that they have to deal with, the things that Black men have to deal with in corporate America, in the world just every single day is difficult. They don't want to go on a date where they're being attacked, right? They want to know that they have a safe place that they can just come and be vulnerable with you because they may have been on a firing squad all day long. They have had to be the only in the room. They've had to stand up for themselves and the whole race of Black men while they're at work. And they don't want to have to do that when they're on a date. They don't want to have to do that when they're hanging out with you. So realize, empathize, step into their world a little bit and understand some of the things that your partner may be dealing with that is outside of you. And when we do that, again, our expectations are aligned. If I know that the person that I'm dating has a very, very big presentation coming up and they don't reach out for a couple of days, well, I know that they're focused on work, right? When they call, I'm not going to go off and be like, what happened? Where were you? I didn't hear from you. This is over, right? Like have the empathy to understand what the other person is going through.
Yeah, I love that. Why do you think the dating relationship in having, you know, somebody who desires to be in a long-term relationship, why is that important even for someone who has entrepreneurial or career goals, right? Because we always kind of make the comparison like, you know, you almost have to pick one or the other, right? And I think that's so unfair. And I'm learning to look at life as and not but or like, oh, what is that? Oh, actually, I'm saying that wrong. Look, I'm looking at things and, less black and white and more gray, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not one or the other. And so when we think about, why it's important for you to have that, like in terms of your career, like, what do you think? What do you think the importance of the correlation is there?
So just like it's tough out there for Black men, it is tough for Black women too. And so there are a lot of Black women business owners. There are a lot of Black women that are having challenges in corporate America, and so they're starting their own businesses.
Yeah.
And as they're starting their own business, they often feel like an island. So a lot of times within my entrepreneurial journey, I've kind of felt like, I was alone. Who can I talk to? Who's there to support me? And so having a partner, again, having that soft place to land, having somebody say after you've worked a 15-hour day of, delivering meals all over town, because you're a caterer, like having somebody cook you dinner, right? Or understand what you're going through. Because at the end of the day, no person exists as an island.
Right.
Even if you're an introvert, even if you're like, I like to be by myself, we all love a hug. We all like an encouraging word or spending time with someone, right? Whatever your love language is.
Right.
And so it's important that as women, we don't isolate ourselves and say, I'm okay. I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need anyone. Because you're saying that as a defense mechanism, right? Because we all need community.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we are human. Yeah, and I'm just like, I'm so passionate about recognizing people's humanity and just like you can be a real person that has real needs, and it's okay for you to desire the things that you genuinely want to desire, right?
Yeah.
You want to have kids, or you don't want to have kids, or you want to have a career, or you want to, whatever the thing, you should be able to just do the things that you desire. Simply God's putting those things in you. So professionally, you're a sales coach, strategist. You're really helping with executives, entrepreneurs, helping them, get more sales or grow their businesses. And so like with what you just said, in terms of someone having a relationship, someone to fall back on, do you think there's also the flip side of that is maybe broken relationships, maybe loneliness can bleed into work and kind of impact you on a negative side? Have you seen that?
Yes. So a lot of the women executives that I work with, when we dig deep, I find that they're having challenges in their personal life. So many times when I'm working with executives within organizations, they've been looked over for a promotion. They are burnt out. They've been put on a performance improvement plan, and they're like, I've done all the things. I have given this company my life, and I'm not getting what I need to get. And so when we do a deep dive, what I see is that their marriage or their long-term relationship, it just isn't supporting them. So if you go to war at work every single day, you have to go to war in your personal life, they bleed into each other. And you don't have a place that you can feel fulfilled and you can feel whole in. And so as we're doing the work to heal the things inside of us that are broken, a lot of times you need to do that work alone. Right. And I think it's important to only bite off one thing at a time. I had a client who was going through a bad relationship breakup, and she had started dating someone else, and then she was looking for a new job and selling her house. I was like, what one thing are we going to focus on? Let's focus on one thing at a time. And she said, okay, I'm going to focus right now on my healing. Okay, I'm going to focus on my healing. I'm going to tell the person I'm dating I need some time, and I'm just going to focus on my healing. And at the end of 6 months, she felt like she was at a place where now she could go look for a new job. And she looked for a new job, and she got like a 30 or 40% increase on her salary because, again, we worked the process. Like, I call it the hard work of healing. And when you think about how your personal life impacts the way that you show up as a leader, impacts the way that you sell, you don't take risks when you are hurting. You don't ask for more when you are hurting. You don't have that creative energy and juice when you are hurting, right? So we really have to focus on getting deep in on our personal side so that our professional side can grow.
And I definitely feel that, because one of my big triggers was rejection. And so if I felt rejected in my marriage, or I felt rejected on a sales call or whatever, those were kind of starting to impact my confidence, how I show up in my business. And so, it definitely took, okay, how can I start getting over some of these rejection and disappointment issues in my personal life? Because now that gives me the skill set to use it in my business, right? Okay, hey, I didn't get that client. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That doesn't mean my business isn't good. You know what I mean? To be able to kind of work through those things has definitely given me a foundation. That is such a good point. And I definitely think that people should prioritize that in terms of when you're investing in yourself, investing in your business, really thinking about how your personal life and your business correlate. And yeah, dating and relationships are a big piece of that. So one other thing I want to say, and I want to get your opinion on, I think choosing to live your life for other people, being on mission, makes you a lot more attractive, right? And so being able for people who are trying to figure out where do I find my person? Thinking about what is your overall mission for your life? You know what I mean? What purpose, what mission has God put you on? Because that allows you to genuinely serve people. And I remember there was this relationship I was in, like probably mid-20s. And I remember that the person I was with at the time, we ended up breaking up, but like, praise God, because now I have my life partner. Yes. But it was a relationship where I felt served at the same time. Hey, didn't work out, but I left like better than they found me, right? And I that was such a learning opportunity. I was like, this doesn't have to be a negative experience. This can be, hey, we both gave it our best shot. It didn't work out. Let's go separate ways, but it's a blessing. You can still be a blessing to people. Yeah. And I think you can do that when you have a service mindset and you're looking to serve other people. So I'm just curious, like kind of what your thoughts are. You might have mentioned that a little bit earlier in the episode, but I just love to kind of hear and kind of speak to that as we kind of wrap up the episode.
So I can't remember the specific Bible verse. I think it's in Luke. It says, love each other as you love yourself, right? And a lot of times what we do is we focus on that other love. Like, I got to love people. I got to love people. Tap into your self-love first, because as yourself, if you don't know how to truly serve yourself and love yourself and show up for yourself, and you don't know what your purpose is, what your mission is on life, like why did God create you to be the person that you are, then you can't show up in a relationship and serve that other person well. Okay. And so when you end a relationship or when you part ways, sometimes they're bad because, life, it happens. Yeah. But a lot of times, as you said, you part on good terms. Like every relationship that I've been in, I've learned something about myself. I've learned the things that I could do better. I learned the things that I'm really, really good at. And I learned what I bring to the table. Right. And I realized that for me, because I have a big servant heart, so I have to ensure that I'm not giving too much too quickly. Right. And so I've learned how to, I call it throttle what I'm doing. Right. And so for some people, they're opposite. They're very closed. They're like, you can't, nope, stay away. And so what they're doing, they're blocking and they're rejecting. So again, the more that you learn about yourself, the better that you can show up in a relationship.
Man, that's so good. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really insightful, really encouraging episode. So I hope if you're watching this, that you took away a couple nuggets that you can take into your personal life, into your business. And yeah, I just really appreciate that. We'll put your information, you have your own podcast, right? Yes. So we'll put the links to your podcast in the description, ways that you can connect with Wesleyene and what she's doing on the sales side, entrepreneurial side, or if you just got personal questions on how she's been navigating dating in this season. And so thank y'all for watching the Blueprint Podcast. Feel free to check out that next episode popping up on your screen. See you guys next time.